Hey guys, today's story is a little different. I was in my kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee blending with the warmth of a Sunday morning, sunlight streaming through the windows onto the oak table set for family brunch. My mother-in-law, Diane, stood at the head of the table, her silver hair gleaming, and delivered a blow that froze the room. "You're not one of us. Get out." Her voice sliced through the clatter of forks and family chatter, leaving a stunned silence. I'd spent 10 years building their real estate business into a $15 million empire, lifting them from debt to prosperity, only to be cast out like an intruder. My name's Lauren Hayes, 38, a real estate developer who's poured every shred of grit into saving my husband's family legacy. To hear Diane demand my exile, after all I'd given, was a betrayal that burned like acid in my veins. And if you think karma's slow, wait until you hear this. So, before you get pulled in, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually believe that betrayal always comes back around. Drop a comment, where are you watching from, and have you ever had someone shatter your trust? Now sit back, let the room go quiet, and let me tell you how it really went down. The kitchen was a still life of shock, the clink of silverware vanished, replaced by a suffocating hush. Diane's eyes were locked on me, cold and unyielding, her lips a thin line of triumph. My husband, Tom, sat beside me, his hand frozen on his coffee mug, his silence a second betrayal that cut deeper than her words. His siblings, scattered around the table, avoided my gaze, their plates of eggs and toast forgotten. I joined this family as a hopeful bride, determined to prove my worth, and over a decade, I'd done more than that, securing high-stakes deals, negotiating contracts, transforming their failing properties into a thriving portfolio. I'd pulled them from the brink of bankruptcy, funded their vacations, even renovated Diane's lake house. Yet here she was, rewriting me as an outsider, a threat to her reign. Her words, "Get out," echoed, not just a command, but a power play, a declaration that I'd never truly belonged. My chest tightened, rage and grief colliding like storm clouds. I thought of the sleepless nights I'd spent studying market trends, the risks I'd taken to close impossible deals, the way I'd smiled through Diane's backhanded compliments about my drive. I'd been their backbone, but to her, I was expendable, a pawn to be removed. My mind churned, piecing together the past few months, her sharp remarks about my overreach, her push for family-only board meetings, Tom's growing distance, his late-night calls he'd brush off. The signs had been there, faint but persistent, and I'd ignored them, trusting my work would cement my place. Now, her demand was a brutal awakening, stripping away my illusions about family loyalty. My first urge was to fight back, to list every dollar I'd earned them, every sacrifice I'd made, their mortgage payments, their children's college funds, their polished lives. But words would have been too easy, a gift to Diane, who craved a spectacle to justify her verdict. She wanted me to unravel, to prove I was the problem. I wouldn't. I stood, my chair scraping softly against the hardwood, and said, "I'll go." My voice was calm, almost serene, a stark contrast to the storm inside. Tom's head snapped up, surprise breaking his silence, but I didn't meet his eyes. I walked out, my steps deliberate, the weight of their stares heavy on my back. The front door clicked shut, the morning air crisp against my flushed skin. I'd left with dignity, but not defeat. In my car, I sat still, the engine off, the quiet amplifying my thoughts. My hands gripped the wheel, not from fear, but from a resolve taking root like iron. Diane thought she'd banished me, that her words would erase my decade of work. She'd forgotten who'd built their empire, who knew its every seam and secret. I'd mastered their business, every contract, client, and loophole was etched in my mind. My anger was cooling, shifting into something precise, strategy. I wasn't fighting for their love anymore, I was fighting for my future, for the life I'd earned. I started the car, the engines hum a vow. Diane had drawn a battle line, but I'd redraw it. My exit wasn't the end, it was the spark of her undoing. Some betrayals don't shatter you, they light a fire that burns brighter than their lies. The city's morning pulse was a distant hum as I sat in my car, the engine's warmth fading, Diane's, "Get out," still ringing in my ears. Her command to leave the family I'd lifted with $15 million in real estate success was a wound that throbbed, but my dignified exit from that brunch was no surrender. It was the first step in a calculated withdrawal. I wasn't running, I was regrouping, gathering leverage to ensure my departure would cost them more than it did me. My hands, still gripping the wheel, steadied as my mind sharpened, mapping a strategy to protect my future. I'd built their empire, and I knew its every crack: contracts, clients, financial threads they thought I'd leave behind. Diane expected me to fade. Instead, I'd weave a plan that would make her regret her words. I drove away, the road ahead a canvas for my next move. My apartment was a quiet refuge, its walls lined with blueprints and deal memos, relics of the empire I'd forged. I dropped my keys on the counter, the clink loud in the stillness, and sat at my desk, pulling out my laptop. My first task was to secure my evidence: every document, email, and transaction that proved my role in the family's success. I'd kept meticulous records, contracts I'd negotiated, properties I'd flipped, financial statements showing the millions I'd brought in. I copied them to a secure drive, my fingers deliberate, each click a brick in the foundation of my counterstrike. These weren't just files, they were proof that their wealth existed because of me, a truth Diane couldn't erase. But leverage needed more than paper, it needed insight into their motives. I opened my laptop's browser and dug into the family business's recent moves. A local real estate blog mentioned a new project, a luxury condo development, with Diane and Tom's brother listed as leads. My name was absent, despite my pitch for that project 6 months ago. My stomach twisted, a fresh sting of betrayal. Diane hadn't just pushed me out, she'd rewritten my contributions, handing them to others. I found board meeting minutes in a shared drive, buried but accessible, showing discussions about streamlining leadership. My exclusion was planned, a coup masked as family loyalty. The realization was a cold wave, but it fueled my focus. They'd underestimated me, and that was my edge. I stood, pacing the room, the hardwood cool under my feet. My mind churned, replaying Diane's words, Tom's silence, the siblings' averted eyes. The betrayal wasn't just Diane's, it was a family's complicity, a collective choice to let me fall. I'd spent a decade believing I was one of them, but their silence at brunch showed I'd been a means to an end, a tool discarded when it outshone the wielder. The conflict tore at me: grief for the family I'd loved, anger at myself for trusting too long. But I wouldn't let it derail me. Grief was a shadow, strategy was my light. I sat back down, pulling out a notebook to sketch my plan, secure my financial stake, protect my professional network, and prepare a move that would shift the balance of power. I emailed my lawyer, Rachel, a sharp woman who'd handled my biggest deals. I outlined Diane's demand, my contributions, and the evidence I'd gathered, asking her to review my options: severance, equity, or legal action. Her reply was swift: "You've got a case. Let's talk tomorrow." Her confidence was a spark, reinforcing my resolve. I also reached out to a trusted accountant, Mark, asking him to audit my personal contributions to the business's profits. If Diane wanted me out, I'd ensure I left with what I'd earned. My phone buzzed with their replies, a quiet network forming, but doubt crept in. Was I becoming like Diane, plotting in shadows, turning family into enemies? The question lingered, but I dismissed it. This wasn't vengeance, it was survival, a way to reclaim my dignity. By afternoon, I'd compiled a timeline of my work: every deal, every dollar, every late night. I found an email from Diane, months old, praising my invaluable role, a contradiction to her brunch dismissal. I saved it, a weapon for later. The city outside was alive, its rhythm a contrast to my focused calm. I stood at my window, the skyline a reminder of the empire I'd built. Diane thought she'd banished me, but I was still standing, armed with knowledge and resolve. My plan was taking shape: protect my stake, expose their dependence on me, and walk away on my terms. My heart was steady, a quiet power rising. They'd tried to break me, but I was already rebuilding. Some exits aren't defeats, they're the first steps in a dance that leaves your enemies stumbling. The afternoon light slanted through my apartment's windows, casting long shadows across the desk where my laptop hummed with evidence of my $15 million contribution to the family's real estate empire. Diane's "get out" had been a calculated strike, but my strategic withdrawal was gaining momentum, my dossier of contracts and financials a growing arsenal. Yet, a plan built on documents alone was a house of cards. I needed allies, people whose loyalty outshone the family's betrayal. Rachel, my lawyer, and Mark, my accountant, were already on board, but I needed more confidants who knew the business, who'd seen my sweat and triumphs, who could fortify my counterstrike. My coffee mug was cold, but my resolve was warm, a steady flame ready to assemble a team that would turn my exit into Diane's reckoning. I picked up my phone, my fingers deliberate, and began reaching out. My first call was to Elena, a former colleague who'd worked with me on the family's biggest deals, now running her own brokerage. She'd always admired my hustle, and when I told her about Diane's brunch ultimatum, her voice sharpened. "She's out of her mind," Elena said. "I'm in whatever you need." Her commitment was a spark, igniting my confidence. Next, I contacted Jamal, a contractor who'd built half the properties I'd developed, a man whose loyalty was earned through years of fair deals. He listened as I explained the betrayal, his silence heavy, then said, "You made us all money, Lauren. I've got your back." Their willingness to stand with me was a lifeline, but it also stirred a conflict. Gratitude clashed with guilt for pulling them into my fight. I'd kept my struggles private, even from them, out of loyalty to Tom's family. That loyalty was ash now. I invited Elena and Jamal to my apartment, transforming my living room into a strategy hub. The air smelled of fresh ink and takeout as we spread my evidence across the table: deal memos, financial statements, emails proving my role in the empire's rise. Elena's eyes narrowed at a contract for the luxury condo project Diane had claimed. "This was your pitch," she said, tapping the page. "They're riding your coattails." Her insight was a revelation, a crack in Diane's narrative I could widen. Jamal nodded, pulling out his phone to share texts from a subcontractor who'd been sidelined by Diane's family-only push. "They're alienating everyone," he said. Their expertise was my foundation, but I felt the weight of leadership. This was my betrayal, my battle, and I had to steer it. We mapped out a plan over coffee, the city's hum a faint backdrop. Elena suggested contacting key clients I'd brought to the business, reminding them of my value. "They'll follow you, not Diane," she said, her voice firm. Jamal offered to gather intel from his network, pinpointing projects at risk without my oversight. I outlined my role, working with Rachel to draft a claim for my equity and with Mark to quantify my financial stake. The strategy was precise, but it wasn't just about money. It was about exposing Diane's overreach, showing the family they'd bet on the wrong horse. I thought of Tom's silence at brunch, his failure to defend me, and my jaw tightened. Diane's empire was built on my work, and I'd make sure they felt its absence. By evening, Elena had already reached out to a major client, planting seeds of doubt about Diane's leadership. Jamal's subcontractor confirmed 2 projects were delayed, citing mismanagement. I added their findings to my dossier, each piece a brick in the wall I was building. But as I worked, doubt crept in. Was I becoming the antagonist, tearing down the family I'd once loved? I'd prided myself on building, not breaking, yet here I was, plotting their downfall. The conflict stung, but I pushed it aside. Diane had rewritten our story, and I was reclaiming my chapter. I stood, stretching, and caught my reflection in the window, tired but resolute, a woman who'd earned her place. We wrapped up as night fell, the city's lights twinkling outside. Elena and Jamal left, promising updates, and I stood alone, the weight of our plan settling into me. I thought of Diane's cold stare, her certainty she'd banished me. She'd misjudged me, thinking I'd fade into her verdict. With Rachel, Mark, Elena, and Jamal beside me, I was forging an alliance stronger than her control. My resolve was a quiet power, a flame that didn't flicker. They'd tried to erase me, but I was building a case they couldn't ignore. I sat back down, my notebook open, ready to refine the next move. Diane's empire was hers to lose, but my future was mine to claim. Some alliances don't just support you, they become the strength that rewrites your story. The city's twilight draped a silver veil over my apartment, its skyline a silent gauntlet as I prepared to confront Diane. My allies Rachel, Mark, Elena, and Jamal had crafted an unassailable fortress of evidence, contracts, financials, wavering clients, and stalled projects that laid bare the family's reliance on my $15 million real estate empire. Diane's "get out" at that brunch had aimed to obliterate my place, but today, I'd turn her authority into dust, not with fury, but with a calculated strike that exposed her reckless overreach. I'd secured a meeting at the family's downtown office, a glass monolith I'd helped conceive, knowing she'd anticipate tears or defiance. Instead, I'd deliver a reversal she couldn't evade. My dossier, a weighty folder brimming with irrefutable proof, rested on my desk, its presence a quiet oath. I slipped into a tailored black dress, my reflection in the mirror a portrait of calm resolve, and left, my heart a steady metronome marching toward justice. The office loomed on the 20th floor, its glass walls capturing the city's waning light, the air sharp with the scent of polished oak and leather. Diane sat at the head of the conference table, her silver hair drawn tight, her posture a fortress of control, flanked by Tom's siblings, their faces etched with guarded loyalty and faint unease. Tom's absence was a gaping wound, his silence from brunch now a permanent scar across our bond. I took the seat opposite, placing my folder down with a deliberate thud, the sound reverberating through Diane's practiced smile like a crack in ice. She launched into her speech, her voice smooth as silk, framing my exit as a strategic necessity for family cohesion, her words a meticulously rehearsed script casting me as the disruptor. I let her weave her narrative, my silence a honed blade, watching her confidence falter as my unyielding stillness unsettled her. She thought she'd orchestrated my downfall, but I was poised to rewrite her script with surgical precision. When she paused, expecting my collapse, I opened the folder, my movements deliberate, like a chess master placing a checkmate piece. "You told me to get out," I said, my voice low, each syllable a measured blow, resonant in the hushed room. "But you forgot who built your legacy." I slid a financial summary across the polished table, my deals illuminated in stark black and white. $15 million in profits, properties wrested from ruin, clients secured through my relentless drive. Diane's eyes flickered, a hairline fracture in her composure. I pressed forward, pulling out Elena's client list, revealing major partners now questioning the family's stability, and Jamal's report on stalled projects, pinned squarely on Diane's family-only mismanagement. "You're losing ground," I said, my gaze pinning her like a spotlight in a darkened theater. "Because you chose control over competence." Her lips tightened, Tom's brother shifting awkwardly, his sister's hands gripping her pen, their silence a widening chasm in Diane's dominion. I leaned forward, sliding Rachel's legal draft across a claim for 40% equity, fortified by Mark's meticulous audit, threatening public exposure through clients, media, and courts if they resisted. "You don't get to erase me," I said, my tone calm but unyielding, a blade cloaked in velvet. "This is what I'm owed, or I let the world see your empire's cracks." Diane's face drained of color, her fingers clutching the table's edge, while Tom's sister let out a soft, involuntary gasp, her eyes darting to her mother. I felt a quiet power, a reversal that required no shouting, no tears, only the weight of truth. They'd expected a shattered daughter-in-law. Instead, they faced a strategist who'd outmaneuvered them at their own game. My evidence wasn't mere paper, it was a mirror, forcing them to confront their empire's fragility without my foundation. The room was taut, the city's hum below a faint heartbeat, my words a thunderhead they couldn't outrun. Yet, as Diane's authority crumbled, a conflict stirred within me. I'd sought justice, but seeing Heralder, her control slipping evoked faint memories of her early warmth, the mother-in-law who'd once called me daughter. I'd built this empire for them, believing it was ours, and now I was dismantling it, brick by brick. The cost wasn't solely theirs, it was the family I'd cherished, the marriage lost to Tom's silence. I quelled the ache, anchoring myself in the moment's clarity. "You have a week to respond," I said, rising, my voice steady, a beacon in the storm. "Or Rachel takes this further." Diane's eyes met mine, a turbulent mix of fury and fear, but she remained silent, her power diminished to a flicker. I left the folder on the table, a gauntlet cast, and walked out, the glass doors hissing shut, their stairs dissolving like mist behind me. Outside, the city thrummed with life, its rhythm a counterpoint to my focused calm. I paused by my car, Elena and Jamal's texts illuminating my phone, their support a steadfast tether. I'd flipped Diane's power, but the victory carried a shadow of loss, a faint echo of what I'd once hoped this family could be. I thought of Tom's absence, Diane's stunned silence, the siblings' discomfort. They'd tried to banish me, but I'd forced them to see my worth, to feel the void of my absence. My resolve was a flame, unwavering in its intensity. Their empire was theirs to lose, but my strength was mine to wield. I drove away, the skyline blurring into streaks of light, braced for the inevitable fallout. Some reckonings don't end with surrender, they end with a truth that redraws the map of power. The city's night air was cool against my skin as I drove home from the office, Diane's pale face and the stunned silence of Tom's siblings etched in my mind. My confrontation had been a precise strike, my dossier of evidence contracts, financials, Elena's client shifts, Jamal's project delays shattering Diane's illusion of control over the $15 million real estate empire I'd built. Her attempt to banish me with a get out had backfired, and now the fallout was unfolding, her authority crumbling as my calculated move took root. Rachel's legal claim for 40% equity and the threat of public exposure hung over them like a storm cloud, but the victory was bittersweet, laced with the weight of a family lost. My allies were steadfast, their support a quiet pulse, but now I had to navigate the wreckage, watching Diane's empire falter while safeguarding my own path. My hands were steady on the wheel, my heart a calm forge, ready to shape the chaos into something enduring. Back in my apartment, the silence was heavy, broken only by the soft ticking of a clock. I dropped my keys on the counter, the clink sharp, and sat at my desk, the dossier's remnants scattered like relics of a won battle. Elena texted, asking for updates, her words a tether to my resolve. I called her, my voice even as I recounted the meeting, Diane's shock, the siblings' discomfort, the folder left like a landmine. They're rattled, Elena said, her tone fierce. Clients are pulling back, I heard 2 are meeting with competitors. Jamal followed up, his subcontractor confirming a major project had stalled, citing Diane's mismanagement. Their intel was a spotlight, revealing cracks in the family's foundation I'd only suspected. But as I hung up, a conflict-stirred satisfaction clashed with a hollow ache. I'd wanted justice, but watching the empire I'd built fray felt like losing a part of myself. The next morning, I scanned local real estate news, my laptop's glow stark in the dim room. A headline caught my eye, Hayes Properties faces client exodus amid leadership concerns. My pulse quickened. Elena's client shifts were rippling, the family's reputation wobbling under Diane's faltering grip. Social media was abuzz, investors questioning the condo project, tenants complaining about delays, a far cry from the thriving portfolio I'd managed. Diane's silence was deafening, her lawyers yet to respond to Rachel's claim. They were scrambling, their empire buckling as my evidence took hold. I should have felt vindicated, but the sight of the family name, too tarnished, twisted something in my chest. I'd fought for that legacy, and now I was its unraveling. I met Rachel at a cafe, its air thick with espresso and morning chatter. She slid a tablet across, showing updated financials. The family's cash flow was strained, loans at risk without my client base. Your claims got them cornered, she said, her eyes sharp. They'll settle, or they'll sink. I nodded, but my thoughts drifted to Tom's absence, Diane's stunned face, the siblings' uneasy glances. I'd wanted them to see my worth, not to watch their world collapse. Rachel sensed my hesitation, her voice softening. You didn't break this, Lauren. They did. Her words were a quiet power, a reminder that my fight was righteous. I sipped my coffee, its bitterness anchoring me, and resolved to stay the course. The empire wasn't my home anymore, but my strength was. By afternoon, Jamal sent a bombshell. A key investor had withdrawn, citing instability in Diane's leadership. The news spread, local blogs amplifying the family's woes, painting Hayes Properties as a sinking ship. I sat in my living room, the city's hum a faint pulse, and felt the tide turning. Diane had bet on control, thinking I'd fade, but her choice was costing her everything: clients, projects, credibility. Yet, as her control crumbled, I felt a shift, not just vindication, but a need to move forward. I didn't want to be defined by their fall, but by what I'd create next. I jotted ideas for a new venture, a real estate firm of my own, rooted in my vision. The act of writing was a spark, a step toward freedom. The day closed with Rachel confirming Diane's lawyers had requested a meeting, a sign they were buckling. I didn't celebrate. Their empire was faltering, but the cost was a family I'd never reclaim. My resolve was steady, a flame that didn't waver. I thought of Diane's cold command, now a fading echo, and the siblings' silence, heavy with regret they'd never voice. They'd tried to erase me, but I'd made them see me. The empire was their ruin, but it wasn't my home. I closed my laptop, the screen fading, and stood in the quiet. My fight wasn't over, but its purpose had shifted: to build, not destroy. Some ruins don't bury you, they become the ground for a stronger foundation. The city's dawn light filtered through my apartment's blinds, casting soft streaks across the desk where my notebook lay open, pages filled with plans for a new real estate venture. Diane's empire was crumbling: clients defecting, projects stalling, her control eroded by my confrontation and the weight of my evidence. Her "get out" had aimed to erase me, but my calculated strike had exposed her overreach, and now, with Rachel's legal claim for 40% equity looming, the family was buckling, their lawyers scrambling for a settlement. Yet, victory was a quiet ache, not a shout of triumph. The family I'd lifted with $15 million was a shadow, Tom's silence a wound that wouldn't heal. Now, I turned to the future, not to dwell on their fall, but to build a life that was wholly mine. I sipped my coffee, its warmth a steady anchor, and began forging new horizons, my heart a calm forge ready to shape what came next. I started with intention, grounding myself in small acts. I scouted office spaces for my firm, envisioning a sleek, open layout with floor-to-ceiling windows, a space where my vision, not Diane's, would thrive. I named it Horizon Realty, a nod to the possibilities ahead. The act of planning was a balm, each step a stitch mending the scars of betrayal. But as I worked, memories of the family surfaced: Tom's smile at our first deal, Diane's rare praise, the siblings' laughter at holiday dinners. The loss was a dull pain, a conflict between the woman who'd loved them and the one who'd had to fight them. I'd built their empire believing it was ours, but now I needed to build for myself. I pushed the ache aside, focusing on the present: me firm, my rules, my strength. By mid-morning, I met Elena at a potential office site, its empty rooms echoing with promise. She'd heard the latest: Hayes Properties had lost another major client, their condo project on hold. Diane's lawyers had offered a settlement, cash and a release from the business, but no apology. Elena's eyes gleamed as she handed me a list of clients eager to join Horizon, contacts she'd rallied from her network. "They trust you, Lauren," she said, her voice firm. Her faith was a quiet power, a reminder that I wasn't starting from nothing. I thanked her, my resolve deepening. I didn't need Diane's empire or her regrets, I needed to create something untouchable, a legacy of my own. Jamal joined us later, his tablet showing market trends favoring boutique firms like mine. "You've got an edge," he said, pointing to data on demand for client-focused developers. "Hayes is sinking, you'll rise." His words sparked a vision of thriving projects, loyal clients, a name that stood for integrity, not control. But as we strategized, doubt crept in. Could I outshine the empire I'd built, or was I chasing a ghost of past glory? The conflict was sharp. I'd defined myself through their success, and now I had to redefine everything. I thought of Diane's cold command, her certainty I'd fade. She'd misjudged me, and that drove me forward. Horizon wasn't just a business, it was my answer to her betrayal, proof of my worth. Afternoon found me signing a lease for the office, its windows framing the city's skyline, a canvas for my dreams. I stood in the empty space, imagining desks buzzing, deals closing, my name on the door. The realtor droned about utilities, but I was designing modern decor, local art, a meeting room for a team I'd choose. This was more than a firm, it was a home, a place where I belonged. I sketched Horizon's logo, a simple arc rising toward a star, each line a promise of renewal. Diane's empire was faltering, another store shuttered, their name fading, but those were their scars, not mine. I'd walked away with dignity, and now I was building with purpose. As dusk settled, I sat on my couch, the city's lights twinkling outside. Rachel texted, confirming the settlement was close, a financial win that felt secondary. My fight had been for more than money, it was for freedom, for a future I'd shape. I thought of Tom's silence, Diane's stunned face, the siblings' unease. Their empire was crumbling, but I didn't revel in it. Justice wasn't their ruin, it was my rise. I lit a candle, its cedar scent soft, and let the quiet envelop me. The conflict lingered, a faint echo of the family I'd lost, but it was overshadowed by a new truth: I was enough. Horizon was my legacy, and it would outshine theirs. I closed my notebook, the pages heavy with possibility, and stood in the stillness. My path was clear, not defined by their betrayal, but by what I'd create. Some endings don't just close a chapter, they open a world you were destined to claim. The months that followed unfolded slowly, like dawn breaking over a new landscape. Horizon Realty opened its doors, its offices alive with deals I'd crafted, clients drawn by my vision, not Diane's fading name. Hayes Properties withered, another project abandoned, their legacy a whisper where mine grew bold. I didn't seek Diane's remorse or Tom's regret, I sought my peace, found in the hum of a thriving firm, the trust of a team I'd chosen, the joy of a life I'd built. Elena and Jamal stayed close, their support a foundation stronger than family ties. I'm not the Lauren who poured herself into someone else's dream, who believed love meant sacrifice. I'm sharper now, forged by betrayal, but not hardened, liberated. Pain doesn't just wound, it teaches you to build better, to choose yourself. Horizon is my reflection, its success a testament to my resilience, my growth. I stand in my office, the city's lights framing my logo, and feel a calm that runs deep. This isn't the end of my story, but it's the end of theirs in mine. I've risen, not as a victim, but as a woman who knows her worth. The skyline glows, the night soft around me, and I am whole.